quick recap, right? We've been in a series entitled what? Thrones, right? Okay. And we've been walking through just kind of different stories of the Bible and just taking a glimpse of lives of different people that lived in this era of kings and judges and such. And we've looked so far at two personified kings. First one we saw was who? Success. And the second one we talked about yesterday was love. And the idea of this is that we've been looking at these personified kings in the sense that when we allow these kings, all right, so we're not saying that they're all bad things or whatever, but when we allow them to have a place on the throne of our hearts, to sit in our hearts as king, man, that's the danger of it. And the reality is this, is that Jesus Christ should be king in the throne of our hearts, as we learned last night. So, hey, we're going to look at the third personified king and the last one for camp, and his name is pleasure. All right, his name is pleasure. And just a quick definition of pleasure, in case you're wondering what is it that pleasure means. Basically, pleasure is a feeling of happy satisfaction or enjoyment. All right, pleasure is a feeling of happy satisfaction and enjoyment. And but rather than just kind of giving you a definition, I want to show you what a moment of pleasure looks like. All right, just real quick, let's take a look at this video.
We don't have
it. You don't have it? There we go. All right, cool. So we did have it. All right, so I don't know how many of you guys have seen that, but as of last week, like that video kind of went viral on social media. You got this gorilla just dancing in a pool. I don't know why in the world this gorilla is dancing in a pool. I think it was the gorillas at a zoo. Zookeepers kind of taking care of it, sees it, catches them dancing, and then they decide to record this gorilla just dancing. But I think what it shows us is this. It gives us a glimpse of what it looks like to experience and feel pleasure for a moment. And if you were to watch the whole video, you see the video is like about a minute long, but the gorilla only does that for like 20 seconds. All right, such a big deal, but it's only 20 seconds that this gorilla finds so much happiness and satisfaction in that baby pool, just jumping in the water. And when I think about my life, when I try to think about the things that give me pleasure, the things I find pleasure in, man, I think one simple thing that I can think of is food, but not just food in general. There's one one restaurant in particular that I love so much, and that's Chipotle. All right, where my Chipotle fans at? Yo, give it up for Chipotle. All right, give it up for Chipotle. So look, I love Chipotle, man. I find so much pleasure in it. Every moment that I go there and I order my food and I get my white rice, my chicken, my black beans, my tomatoes, my corn, my cheese, lettuce, and I think that's it. Some wok sometimes, and and then they roll it up in the burrito, and then when I bite that burrito, man, that moment is just so enjoyable. Or when you get a quesadilla, maybe you're not really the burrito person, so you're more into the quesadillas, or maybe you're into the quesarito. You guys hear about that one? Yeah, so if you didn't know, that's like the secret menu. You go to Chipotle and they make your bowl, and then you ask them for a quesadilla, and then they put it on top of the quesadilla and they roll it up. So it's like a quesarito. It's like a burrito and quesadilla put together. But when I bite that thing, man, it is so good. It's so good. I find so much pleasure in it. And it's not only with food, but it's just the things around our world. I mean, if we were to ask ourselves and wonder, why is it that we love things like food? Why is it that we love things like sports? Why is it that we love things like shopping and the outdoors and music? It's because we find pleasure in them. Like in the moment when we're listening to a song and we're dancing, y'all doing the whip and the nay-nay and all that, or maybe dabbing, or y'all cooking and eating whatever cereal, the fake cereal. James Harden be doing that after he makes a jump shot. He's just like eating something. I don't know what that means, but he's cooking something and eating it. But whatever that means, though, in that moment when we partake in those things, we just find pleasure in them. And there's nothing wrong with that. And the reason why there's nothing wrong with that is because God designed us in a way that where we can experience and feel pleasure. It was God's idea. All right, feeling pleasure, experiencing pleasure was God's idea from the start. He designed us in that way that we can experience moments of happiness, we can experience moments of satisfaction, and we can simply enjoy things. So maybe for you, maybe something that will just resonate with all of us in this room is maybe you enjoy God's creation. Maybe this week at Beach Week, man, you've just been having fun at the beach. Maybe some of you have got up early, and I know some of y'all are running on the beach, and y'all crazy, man. I don't do that stuff. I'm so out of shape. But that's good for you. It's healthy. But maybe you like going out and watching the clouds. One thing I have been doing, though, is spending time with the Lord on the balcony, looking at the clouds, just in awe and amazement of His creation, and watching the waves, like, just crash and all that. And but maybe for you guys, you've enjoyed that. You've enjoyed this setting of just looking at what God has made, or the other aspects. Maybe it's the sand, or maybe it's just being with this large group of people that are so diverse that God has made, and you're just enjoying your time with people in your room and all these things. And that's completely cool, because God made us that way. He wants us to enjoy His creation, and He has given us the ability to taste things, to see things, to hear things, and through all these facets of what He has given us, we can experience and feel pleasure, whether that's eating Chipotle, or whether that's eating that really good mac and cheese last night from House of Blues, whatever it is, or if it's smelling the fresh air of the ocean, or you're just tanning outside. Pleasure was God's idea. All right, pleasure was God's idea, and the Bible even says in Zephaniah 3:17 that God finds pleasure in His people. It says this: "The Lord your God is with you, the mighty warrior who saves. He will take great delight in you. In His love, He will no longer rebuke you, but will rejoice over you with singing." And this is a picture of what the future of the nation of Israel will look like with God when Jesus returns, and they're in this 1,000-year period where they're reigning, and there's just peace, and there's no more war, and there's no more battles and gory stuff as we've been reading about, like in Samson's story and Saul's story. None of that will exist. And God gives us that picture through Zephaniah 3:17, but the main thing that we see here is that God delights in His people. And He not only finds happiness and satisfaction in His people, but He sings over them. You know what I'm saying? It was like Caleb talking about last night. You know, when you're really, like, intensely in love with someone, like, you sing, you know, songs like, "Hey There, Delilah." You know, you just look like an idiot like Caleb did. You know what I'm saying? On the phone, the girl just left him behind. Caleb's my homie, all right? It's all good. It's all love. But, and I'm not saying God's an idiot, but God finds so much delight in His people that He even sings over them. So what does it say? God finds pleasure in His people too. So God isn't just some boring guy just kind of sitting around, but He delights in His creation as well. But I want to make a quick distinction, though. There are good pleasures in life. There are also pleasures in life that can be harmful. They can be bad. We have to be mindful of this, of what we find pleasure in, because today, in our present time, in our culture, they present a lot of pleasures in life as good things. But sometimes those things, or most of the time those things, cannot be pleasing to God. So take, for example, in Colossians chapter 3, verses 1 through 15, if you were just to read what Paul lays out here, Paul is talking to Christians, and he's encouraging them to, now that they are new in Christ, to set their heart on things of above. All right, to set their heart and to pursue the pleasures of God as opposed to pursuing pleasures in this world. And he lists out in Colossians 3, 5 through 10, particular things that you should not abide by. So like sexual immorality, or lust, and pride, and selfishness, and greed. And he's saying, don't partake in these things, because God, in verse 6, it says, will pour out His wrath upon those who are living in disobedience. So we do see that there are some good things in life that are extremely pleasurable, and we do know that there are things, according to God's word, that are bad, but that can be pleasurable as well. But I want you to understand this, that no matter whether you find pleasure in something that is good, or whether you find pleasure in something that is bad, our purpose in life isn't to pursue pleasure. It's not about living to be fulfilled by moments of enjoyment, but it's about allowing God to fill us so that we can find an ultimate satisfaction in Him and in His ways. So just check out this quote real quick by this pastor and Christian book writer. His name is Paul Tripp, and he says this. He says, "Pleasure can never be an end in itself. I can never just say that I'm going to go wherever pleasure leads me, because pleasure requires boundaries. And that is because my heart is always living under the rulership of something. And what controls my heart will control my body. And so I must not let pleasure, the pursuit of pleasure, be the thing that rules me. So this is what I want you guys to understand this morning. That whether you're pursuing something good or something bad and you find pleasure in it, the idea is this, is that we would not allow the pursuit of pleasure to be the very thing that rules in our hearts. Our cry out this morning to you guys is that you would not allow pleasure to become the king on the throne of your heart. And since we're on the topics of thrones and we're talking about the kings of Israel and stuff, man, there's one king that I can think about in God's word that, man, he experienced a moment of pleasure. And when he experienced that moment, man, he caved. He just allowed it to consume him and take control of him. And that guy, that very king, his name is David. Can you guys say David? All right, David. All right, so now we're going to focus this morning on King David. And I'm just going to kind of just run through a bullet list of some things. So we're not really going to read into his story. But if you're not familiar with who David is, all right, so we learned on Sunday that Saul was the first king of Israel, all right, of the united nation of Israel. He unified the scattered people. They were requesting a king. God granted him a king, gave him Saul. Saul unites the people. But then we also learned that Saul disobeyed God twice. And then as a result, he began to pursue his own selfish ambitions and pursue success on his own behalf. He stopped living to bring God glory. And then there was a lot of things got really dark in his life. He was trying to kill David. He was trying to do all these things. He had an evil spirit in him. He kind of just fell off the grid. So then God decides this. In 1 Samuel 16, 12 through 13, we see that now God decides to remove Saul from his kingship, and he decides to anoint David. But in this moment, David doesn't become king yet, but he's saying this is going to be the next guy up. Okay, he's going to be the next one to be king. So he anoints David as the king of Israel to be an obedient king towards God. We see this in 1 Samuel 16, 12 through 13. God instructs Samuel to choose him. Another thing about David that we know is that David was a fearless and he was a mighty warrior, okay? He was more fearless and even way more of a mighty warrior than Saul was. And let me tell you something, man. David was savage, all right? Dude was straight savage. And let me tell you why. Because in 1 Samuel 17, verse 37, man, he says that God spared him from the paw of a bear and the paw of a lion. Meaning this, that he went like face to face with the bear and the lion. So David ain't just some punk, all right? So in 1 Samuel 16, 12 through 13, it talks about he's handsome, has these nice features, you know, he's good looking like Donnie, you know what I'm saying? But this is the thing though. He was also a mighty warrior. Like he took on a bear. Like, are you guys with me? Have you seen The Revenant with Leonardo DiCaprio? If you have seen that movie, you know that one scene, man, where Leonardo tries to, defend himself with that bear. And, man, that bear tore him up. Yo, like, that dude was left for dead. All right, I hate spoiler alert, so just go watch the movie. But Leonardo DiCaprio cannot take on a bear. But David's like, hey, man, I knocked that bear out, bro. Man, he threw his hands up. I took that lion down too, and he's saying, in God helped me to do this, so he's fearless. And he's also mighty, so he defeated a mighty giant named Goliath. In 1 Samuel 17, verse 49 through 51, we see this story. There's this giant who's a part of the Philistine army, and we learned earlier this week that the Philistines are, in this time, kind of like the arch enemies of the Israelites. They're always going back and forth at war with one another. Saul was always at war with them. And then David, one day, there's this giant named Goliath who's challenging the nation of Israel. He's probably like 9, 10 feet tall, wearing like 150 pounds of armor, has this massive sword. All of the Israelites are scared to fight him. He's calling them out. He's like, man, bring out your best soldier, your best warrior. Maybe a good way to think of it is if you ever seen the movie Troy, came out like years ago. I think I was in middle high school. But in Troy, there's the first fighting scene, like Achilles fights this guy, he just jumps and like slaps him in the throat, he dies. But he was like this giant guy. Everyone thought Achilles was about to die, but he proved them wrong. In the same sense, everyone's scared to face this giant. But David steps forward. He's like, I'll take it. And I don't even need a bow and arrow. I don't even need a sword. I don't even need a spear. I'm just going to take a couple stones and a slingshot. And I'm just going to go out and face this giant. And what does he do? He knocks him down with just one shot, just a sling, stone, bam, hits him in the forehead. Bye. And then he's out. And then after, he runs up to him, and he's like, bye. And not only that, but then he gets his sword. This is why he's savage. Cuts his head off, right? And then he takes his head and brings it back to King Saul, and he's like, there's your boy, all right? And all the Philistines, they just run away. They're just scared for their lives. They're like, what in the world just happened? This little dude, super handsome, Justin Bieber-looking guy, is this fearless and mighty warrior, takes him out. And then we see later in the story, man, God just grants so much favor upon David. Remember, he was anointed to be this king. So then we see that Saul in 1 Samuel 18, 5 through 7, Saul appoints him to be a military leader, and he won many battles for Israel. And it says in verse 7, they begin to sing these songs, you know, and this is when Saul became jealous, what we talked about the other day. When they said that David, they were crediting him for killing tens of thousands, and only Saul killed thousands. So David becomes this mighty warrior, wins many battles. The people are pleased with him. So yes, we know that David was fearless, a mighty warrior, but we also know that David had a heart for God. So out of the 150 Psalms that are found in the Bible, man, David is credited to have written a little over half of them. Maybe in the 70s range, David wrote those. And this is what's unique about the Psalms. If you read them over and over, through whatever chapter, which one you want to find that he wrote, this is what he does with the Psalms. He just expresses his love for God. He expresses his love for God through songs or poetically. He expresses his desire to obey God's commands. He expresses his gratitude toward God for what he has done in his life. And you just see through the Psalms that David had a heart that was devoted to God. David was a big deal. He's even mentioned in the New Testament in Acts 13 when Paul is pretty much sharing the gospel with people, and he's reminding the Jewish people their story, reminding them of how God had given them a king and how Saul failed, and then he mentions David, but he makes an important aspect about David. Acts 13:22, after removing Saul, he made David their king, and God testified concerning him. This is what God said about David: I have found David, the son of Jesse, a man after my own heart, and he would do everything that I want him to do. And we see that David had God's favor. He loved God. He sought always to obey him. He sought always to live in gratitude towards him, no matter what season of life he was in. And if we were to study David's life, we see that David was a king who was able to display what Saul couldn't, and that was to live in obedience towards God. To be a king that wasn't looking for his own glory, that wasn't looking for his own success, but a king that would finally give up the throne in his heart to God and allow God to reign. But maybe some of you are like, whoa, like, hold up, Drew, man. Look, man, I grew up in Awana. You know what I'm saying? Like, I've been in Kids Quest all my life. Like, I know David's story. I know he was a great king. I know he was a fearless warrior. I know that stuff. You're saying all the good stuff about him. But what about that one moment, man, when David did something real shady? Like, he did something really, really shady. Like, didn't he sin by taking a wife that wasn't his? Yeah, you're right. So 2 Samuel chapter 11 through 12, all right? So we're not going to read the whole 2 chapters, kind of long, but I want to encourage you guys to read it on your own so you can become a little more familiar with the story later. But I'll explain it a little bit. So 2 Samuel 11 through 12 records the story of David and Bathsheba, all right? And some of you guys are familiar, some of you guys aren't, so I'm going to explain it just a little bit. So 2 Samuel 11 verse 1 says that they're in the Israelites are in a time of war, okay? They're in a time of war with these people called the Ammonites. And then, so David sends Joab out into battle, one of his leaders, to go and defeat these guys, to defeat their idols, all that. So they go out to battle, and David stays behind, all right? So we got this king, this commander of this army who's supposed to be out in battle, but he stays behind. So one day, as he's staying behind, this is what happens. So basically, David's out in his roof one day, all right? And as the king of Israel, all right, he has like a nice aerial view, all right, from his roof, balcony, however you want to think of it. Maybe think of it as a nice penthouse view. Some of you may or may not live in what is it? Those tall buildings, high-rise apartments. You know, you got that nice view with the floor-to-ceiling windows, and it's just really high and stretched out, and you just can look down at the city. Maybe you look down at Tyson's, maybe you look down at Bethesda or whatever city you're in, or maybe you've just been in a high-rise building before, and you've looked. So David has this aerial view. He's out on his roof one day, just kind of chilling, looking around. And it's not weird for him to do that. He's the king of Israel. He's looking down on his people. There's a proverb, I believe it's Proverbs 7, that lists an account of when David would just look among the people, see the animals, see the people kind of moving around, and kind of just gauge upon his people. So he's looking out from his roof, but this is what he sees. He looks down at a home, inside of a window, and he sees this hot girl taking a bath. All right? That's basically what he sees. All right? Let's just be real. All right? He sees Bathsheba. All right? Bathsheba is this lady, and she is taking a bath. And when he's looking down, all right, he's just looking at the people, sees this house, all right? Maybe she's a little more on the poor side, but it's not uncommon for someone to not have covered their window in that time. Maybe some people didn't. So somehow he sees her taking a bath, and his eyes are captured by her physical beauty. All right? His eyes are captured by her physical beauty, and he finds pleasure in watching her. David's out on the roof, he's looking around, spots this woman, she's taking a bath, sees her, he finds pleasure in watching her, but that was not enough for him. Watching her wasn't enough, so what happened? So he felt the only way that he could truly be satisfied was by having her for himself. So he's like, man, this is a pleasurable moment, me watching. But I not only want to watch, but I want to have her for myself. I want to sleep with her. That's basically what he was thinking. He wanted to sleep with her. And now let's be real quick, all right? So before you guys are like super judgmental and you're like, oh, but you just said he's this mighty king and he had a heart after God and he was, this great guy. Like, why did he do that? I mean, we can't rule out that David struggled with he had a sinful nature too. He wasn't Jesus. He wasn't perfect. And he just found himself in a moment. Wrong place, wrong time, doing something that he shouldn't have done. Watching this woman, he could have just easily turned away and been like, you know what, God, I'm not doing that. I got wives of my own. Like, you've given me so much. Like, let me just go away. But no, instead, David's like, I want another one. So he goes out, and he's kind of struggling, and he's watching her. And then, it's kind of like, you guys, just to make it a little more practical for you guys to understand, like, imagine how would you feel if you were just out on the roof and you just happen to see Kylie Jenner taking a bath. You know what I'm saying? Or girls, like, let's be real. Or girls, you see Drake or Shawn Mendes taking a bath. Like, all right, like, we don't got to get too deep into the context of that. But let me tell you something. You guys might feel some sort of excitement or something. You might snap it real quick, or you might IG it on your story or something, or I don't know what you'll do, but you may feel a little sense of excitement if you were to be in that position. And that's why, boys, that's why your rooms aren't facing the ocean. They're facing the parking lot. But this is another story. So David, all right, listen to this. David, led by his desire to feel this feeling of satisfaction, had her brought to him. He had her brought to him, and he slept with her. All right, and keep this in mind. David was supposed to be on the battlefield with his homeboys, fighting for his nation, leading his people. But rather than being in the battlefield, he preferred to be in the bedroom. So he had her brought to him. He slept with her. And in your terms, he knocked her up. All right. Then she found out she was preggo. And then, so now she's preggo. All right. So now this is a big problem. So David panics because he's like, oh, snap. She's married. All right. Her husband is one of my leaders in battle. He's not here. Everyone's going to find out. She's been at my house in my crib with me. Everyone's going to know that ain't my baby. All right. This is like Maury just happening all right here, an episode of Maury. So she tells him she's preggo. He panics, had her husband Uriah sent back from war to come home. He tries to convince him to go and be home with his wife, spend time with her. He gets him a little tipsy, you know what I'm saying? They're going to drink a little wine, some Sky Vodka with some cherry coke or whatever, he gets him a little drunk or whatever, and he's like, hey man, go back home and like be with your wife. You know what I'm saying? Because David wanted Uriah to sleep with his wife, so then people would think, oh yeah, that's their kid. But that didn't happen. Uriah's like, nah, man. He's like, all of our men are out in battle. Pretty much, he's like, why would I waste my time being home with my family when I know my brothers are out there dying and shedding blood? So he doesn't do it. David's plan fails. Uriah goes back to war, and then this is what David does. He sends Joab, who's leading the Israelites in this war. He sends him a note, and he says, hey man, he's like, put Uriah on the front line of the next battle, of the fierce, not only that, but he said, of the fiercest battle. Put him in front of the fiercest battle, ultimately, so he could die. And guess what? Some of y'all know the story. What happened to Uriah? He died. And then what did David do after? He took Bathsheba to be his wife. Like, this is crazy. Like, bro, like, you gotta think. This is a dramatic story. Like, this sounds twisted, and it sounds evil, and it sounds dark. It sounds like something super dramatic off Dr. Phil, like, catch me outside status, all right? Like, this is, like, really crazy what is happening. And you would think that David was better than this. You would think David was better than this. But here was his problem, that in that moment, when he saw Bathsheba, he allowed a feeling of pleasure. He allowed a pleasurable feeling to take a seat on the throne of his heart. He allowed this feeling of pleasure to become king of his heart in that moment. And he decided that a temporary feeling of satisfaction would be fulfilling without thinking about the consequences, without thinking about what would happen. And he was just thinking, no, this is what I want. He was like, I want to be temporarily satisfied by her. I want to feel this pleasure. I just want to give my all to it. So what does he do? He saw her, was aroused by her. He wanted her. He went and abused of the power that God had given him over his people to get her and to kill her husband and then to keep her, all because he chose to be fulfilled by a moment of pleasure rather than finding complete joy and satisfaction in God and all the things God had already given him. Completely abused of God. And allowed that pleasurable moment to just reign in his heart. And as we look at this story, man, like, as we look at David's example of pursuing a pleasurable moment, it just makes me think, like, are we any different than him? In regards to that moment, are we any different? And I'm not saying you guys are out, like, watching people take baths and stuff. You know, what I'm getting at is this. Listen up. What I'm getting at is this, is that your chase for pleasure is setting the direction for your life. Your chase for pleasure is setting the direction for your life. And you ultimately love the things of this world. And you love them so much that you are willing to sacrifice the eternal good that God wants to see out of your life in exchange for temporary fulfillment. You just love these things so much. And for some of you, the very pleasures that you live for and are driven by are living for the party life. Maybe that's what you find pleasure in. Maybe that's all you pursue in your life. Maybe that reigns in your heart. Or maybe it's alcohol. Maybe it's just getting wasted. You just love that. You just find so much pleasure in getting wasted and then having a hangover and throwing up. I don't know what's so pleasurable about that. But maybe some of you, those are the pleasures that you are seeking. Or maybe it's doing drugs or being a distributor of drugs. Maybe you're out there slinging broccoli or you're smoking broccoli. Whatever it is, you may find pleasure in that. That may be the very pleasure that is driving you in what you are living for. Or maybe it's the hookup culture, man. Maybe it's you participating in that because you want to up your sex game. You want to get all the experience you can before you hit college and you become a grown-up. Or maybe you're not having sex, but maybe you really think about it. You find so much pleasure in just thinking about it. and just desiring it, wishing that you could be a part of it, or maybe you fantasize by being in front of a screen on your phone, or on your tablet, or on your laptop, and just watching porn for just spending several hours of your week, just finding pleasure in porn. Or maybe you are driven by and living for just being lazy. Maybe you're just a lazy bum. That's how Mickey would say on the Rocky movies. You're a bum. Like, maybe you're just a lazy bum. You just like waking up late. You find pleasure and just, I don't take school seriously. Like, yeah, I get D's and E's and I'm proud of it, man. You're a bum, man. You don't work. You don't do chores. You don't do nothing. Like, you're here, and maybe your laziness, you're still finding pleasure. You're like, man, I don't want to come to that morning session, man. I'm going to wake up at 10. So then I can just get up real quick, get ready, and then be there at 10:30 for the regular session. You know, I'm not trying to make you feel bad, but some of you guys maybe are finding pleasure in that laziness. Or maybe some of you are driven by, or are living for, finding pleasure in shopping. You know what I'm saying? Where are my ladies at? Y'all love shopping, right? You know, H&M, Forever 21, you know what I'm saying? Route 21, whatever. You know, I don't know, guys. What do y'all like? Best Buy? I think, guys, Home Depot? That's like something DJ would be into. No, DJ would be into like a hunting store. I'm more of like going to Foot Locker. That's what I find pleasure in. Shoes, all right? But maybe for some of you, it's shopping. Or maybe it's just gossip. Maybe you find so much pleasure in just talking bad about others. Maybe you find so much pleasure in making comparisons. Maybe you've been doing that while you've been here. Gossiping about the people in your room. Gossiping about the other people in your campus. Gossiping about how you just can't, you're annoyed by your leader because their mac and cheese ain't good, all right? They're trying their best to make mac and cheese in the room, but it's just not coming out as cheesy. It's not right. They put too much water in it. It's just not good. Or whatever it is you guys enjoy gossiping about, whether it's Kylie Jenner or whether her lips got bigger this week or whatever it may be, but you just enjoy, you're driven by it, and you live for gossip, and that is the very pleasure in your life that you are pursuing. Look, man, these are just a few to mention, whether they're good or bad. But whatever pleasure you're pursuing, you know exactly what you're in pursuit of. I just mentioned a few. But there's several things you can find pleasure. And you, and you, and you, and you, and you, and even myself, I know exactly what I am pursuing. And you know exactly what pleasures have become an idol in your heart and how they have taken God's rightful place on the throne of your heart. And I want you guys to understand that the problem isn't pleasure. Listen to me. The problem is not pleasure. The problem is not success. The problem is not love. The problem is king pleasure. It's king success. It's king love. The problem is when you allow pleasure to drive your life. Because those things by their nature, they are not kings. It is a king because you have decided to give it its rightful place. You have decided to allow it to rule over you. You've given that king its place in your heart. And for many of you in this room, your struggle may be this. Listen up. Your struggle may be this, that I love the things, I find feelings of pleasure and satisfaction more than I love God in his ways. I love the things, I find feelings of pleasure and satisfaction more than I love God in his ways. So you are controlled by your pleasures. And you end up worshiping the created thing instead of the creator. Look, man, at some point in our lives, man, we fall into this trap. I think we're all guilty of it. We fall into this trap of thinking and believing that in this life we will find things that will bring us ultimate satisfaction. But I'm here to say that isn't true. That only in God can you be completely satisfied, and only He can be the one to satisfy and fill our hearts for an eternity. We were created in Psalm 37:4 to delight in God. We were created to delight in God and accept with gratitude the good things that He provides us. And once again, I'm not saying that God is opposed to pleasure, because He isn't opposed to pleasure. He is opposed to pleasure becoming the king of our hearts. God is not opposed to pleasure. God is opposed to pleasure becoming the king of our hearts. And sometimes we have to pass up on particular pleasures in this life in order to invest in the king who can ultimately satisfy us for an eternity. Sometimes we have to sacrifice certain pleasures of this life so that we can live a life that brings glory and honor to God. I love what John Piper, he says this, man. He said, God is most glorified in us when we are most satisfied in Him. God is more glorified in us when we are more satisfied in Him. And I think David, later on in life, he realized that, man. David's kingship didn't end there. He repented of his sin. He actually gets confronted by this prophet named Nathan. And Nathan calls him out, man. He calls him out. It's heavy. He composes a whole psalm towards it. Just laying out how horribly he felt. And how he needed God's grace and His mercy and love and forgiveness in his life. And God granted that to him, and David repented of that sin. But when I look at Psalm 16:11, man, I love what David writes here. He says, you make known to me the path of life, and you will fill me with joy in your presence, with eternal pleasures at your right hand. So what he's saying is that only God can satisfy us for an eternity, and not only can He satisfy for you for an eternity, His promises indicates that we won't be disappointed. But instead, we will find joy and complete satisfaction in giving Him our all, and giving Him all glory, and giving Him all honor, and giving Him all praise, and giving Him all recognition as the King in our heart. Another quote real quick by Paul Tripp. He says this. He says, here is the ticket with pleasure. My pursuit of pleasure, my enjoyment of pleasure, must submit itself to a greater pleasure than physical pleasure. And that is the pleasure of God. It is the greatest pleasure of God. My joy in my relationship with God, my joy in pleasing God, my celebration of God's grace, my desire to live the way the beautiful Creator made me, that protects me from being a slave to pleasure that will only get me into trouble. So what Paul Tripp is writing here is he's saying this. He's like, you can go out and you can pursue all these pleasures, but they won't satisfy. But the one thing that will is the greatest pleasure of all, and that greatest pleasure is God. So my question for you this morning is this. So what is your greatest pleasure? Is your greatest pleasure God? Do you find absolute joy in pleasing Him? Is it exciting for you to spend time in His presence? Is God the one who is ultimately bringing you pleasure in life? I want you to think about that for a second. And with your eyes closed, I want you guys to bow your head real quick and just take a moment between you and the Lord. want you guys to reflect on this question. And this is our thought of the day, and it's this. In what things are you finding satisfaction? In what things are you finding satisfaction? Just think of that. Think of that for a second. What things are you finding satisfaction? And do you believe that there is complete satisfaction found in God? Just take a second right here. Just take a minute with the Lord, man, and you just dwell on that, and you pray or think about it, do whatever you need to do, but I'll give you a minute. Lord, you know exactly what is sitting on the throne of our hearts. And for some of us in this room, maybe it's King Success. For some of us, it may be King Love. But maybe this morning you have revealed to us that it is King Pleasure. And Father, I just pray that you would forgive us for pursuing these pleasures in this life over pursuing the greatest pleasure, which is you. And God, we're all guilty. We're all extremely guilty of pursuing things in this life that we believe will just satisfy us. God, and these students, they know, even myself, I know the very things in my heart that I wrestle with, that I find myself enjoying often more than you. So, Father, whether it's Netflix, Lord, whether it's Xbox, or whether it's shopping, or whether it's dancing, or partying, or eating Chipotle, God, whatever it is, whether it's good or bad, Lord, I pray that if these things are reigning in our hearts, if these pleasures are the number one thing that we are pursuing, God, I pray that you would remove them, God. That we would examine our hearts, Lord, and that you would reveal to us the very ways, the next step that we have to take to just rid of the nonsense in our lives. And to pursue you as the greatest pleasure of all. So God, with this question, what brings us satisfaction? And do we find ultimate satisfaction in you? Just sit in our heart and sit in our mind throughout the day. And God, I pray that it would challenge every single person, whether they're in this room and they acknowledge you, whether they hate you, whether they despise you, whether they think you are not real, or whether they love you, or whether they just gave their life to you last night. God, I pray that this question would challenge us, and that we would draw closer to you.